Greetings, fanboys and fangirls. Jared here with another video review from Fanboys Forever. And today we're going to continue our celebration of the release of Shin Ultraman. Now, for those that are unfamiliar with Ultraman, he is kind of the Japanese equivalent to our Superman. He's a character that has completely pervaded the pop culture in Japan and has been around since the 60s. Ultraman is a product of Tsuburaya Productions, a company that was responsible for a lot of the early Godzilla films' special effects, and were pioneers in suitimation. Of course, Ultraman himself is a giant hero who fights, well, giant kaiju monsters, so you can definitely see the connection there. Just like Godzilla, who got the Shin treatment a few years ago, now it's Ultraman's turn, and I'm definitely excited to actually see the film. Of course, us here in America we'll probably have to wait a little while before we can see an official high-quality version of the movie. But until then, we are able to import a lot of the merchandise, including a lot of actual official US sellers like Amazon, which leads me to this guy. Today we're looking at the very aptly named Dynaction figure of Shin Ultraman, based of course on the film of the same name. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Now, it's very important right away that we go ahead and establish the size of this figure. You may remember that I recently reviewed the 3 3/4 Ultraman figure from Mezco's 5-point series. Well, this is how big that figure is compared to the Ultraman that we are looking at today. As you can see, it's a little bit of a difference. The Ultraman that you see in front of you is about 16 inches tall, making this a very large figure, and certainly kind of in the scale of a human being 1 inch compared to Ultraman's 16. For the sake of further scale, you can see here that I just have a standard 12-inch American ruler, and you can definitely see that he goes beyond that foot. So there's a huge variety of options for what kind of Shin Ultraman that you may want to add to your collection. It definitely seems like this is one of the biggest merchandise blitz or pushes, whatever you want to say, in Asia in years. And perhaps there is no bigger one or more complex one than the one we are looking at today. Although I don't want to spend too long on it, here is the giant box that he comes in. It's really cool. It has a flap that opens in the front and it's held in magnetically so that if you do want to place him back in the box, and I have no idea why you would, you can do that. I definitely prefer him out so that he can be posed around. But that's enough about the box. You're here to see the figure. Looking at Ultraman, he is really quite a technical marvel. If I had to compare him to anything that I've previously had in my collection, I would actually say that he's quite a bit like the old 18-inch Spider-Man 2 figure from Toy Biz that had all of that articulation. He's of course not quite that articulated and not quite that large, but he does kind of remind me of that. In terms of detail, there's so much going on here. And you know what? Before I even show anything, because I just can't bear not to have it on during the review, I'm just going to go ahead and show you an action feature. Usually I don't do this kind of thing first, but the head just comes off really easily with a 3-prong connection right there. And on the back, you had to pull out one of those tab things, to make it work. You can see there's an on-off switch and a battery compartment for a watch cell. I believe they're watch cell batteries. Just slide that on, and once you've got all that lined back up, you can now see that Ultraman's eyes have lit up. I really love it when there's a light up feature on something that makes sense, that's movie accurate, and definitely accurate to the history of the character. And this is one of those times. You can see that if I were to turn out one of my studio lights, instantly you can see that it is a very impressive effect. Matter of fact, with both out, yep, he shines bright in pitch black. The head sculpt itself is very indicative of the new film. Of course, this new film does not stray very much at all from the original Ultraman design, almost giving him more of an elongated head to make him, I suppose, appear a little more alien and a little less like a guy in a suit. Going on down, you can see that we have Ultraman's rather thin neck, but once again, that is also in line with the new design from the movie. Just one of those subtle changes. They've also eliminated that back fin that was just, of course, meant to be the way that the suit actor got into the costume. Speaking of the suit actor, the lanky proportions of the body are supposedly based on his actual measurements and proportions, and I really like that. It gives kind of a grounded feeling to the actual physique of Ultraman in the movie from the clips and trailers that I have seen. You can also see that Ultraman does not have the color timer. Now, the color timer is a gem that appears in the middle of Ultraman's chest to kind of warn him when his power is running low. He can only be Ultraman for 3 minutes. But in this, you can see that there is no such thing. So that is really interesting, and I'm not 100% sure how that will play into the movie, if at all. Moving on down, you can see that Ultraman does just have his kind of silver pants slash boot things with the little red designs, and then his kind of pointy shoes that he always has. You can see the arms are also well detailed, and as I was saying earlier, the back and the Ultra butt are in fine form. So Ultraman is looking great. You can see that there are no foot pegs down here. There's just detailing that is, I suppose, movie accurate. But we'll get into why you don't really need any pegs in the feet. Before we get into articulation, which is of course by far the most technical aspect of this figure, it is important to note what accessories he does include. You can see that he comes with this tiny scaled human, just I think as simply a demonstration of how large he is. This human is just about 1 inch tall. It's pretty much 3/4 of an inch, as you can see. For whatever reason, he is done in transparent plastic. It's just a guy in a suit. But if you put him right with Ultraman, he is indeed so small that it is almost hard to even perceive him. So it's kind of funny just how small he is. And if you really want to, you can even put him in the palm of Ultraman's hand. Ultraman also comes with a bevy of alternative hands. The first set of alternative hands are these 2 fists right here. Of course, he's going to include that to punch out the monsters. I suppose the best descriptor for these hands are they're just kind of open, relaxed hands. He has the hands he's currently wearing, which are his Specium Ray hands, which of course you can put his arms together and do the famous pose. And he also comes with my favorite set of hands, the grappling hands. This is when he's getting ready to kind of go into his martial arts pose, where he's getting ready to take down a monster, and he leans down and kind of has his hands out like this. So that's definitely my favorite Ultraman pose. He also comes with an absolutely gigantic display stand, and this thing is huge, but we're going to get into that a little bit later. So let's see what this Ultraman has got in terms of posing. There's just so much to go over here, so we're going to take our time. We have the neck, which can of course go all the way around if you so wish. You can see that he can look up about that much. He can look down about that much. And if you see, the neck is also independently moving. And the neck does move up and down. I don't think the neck moves side to side very much, but you definitely get a lot of up and down motion. Now, here's the thing with the head. There is a joint built into the neck that if you pull, the head kind of hyper extends. And for that reason, you can have him look straight ahead for those flying poses. So this is a terrific feature. If you want him to have a longer neck, you can kind of leave it like this. But if you want him to go back to a more proportional look, simply just push it down. And he's more in regular proportion that way. But of course, this is, I think, intended just to get those flight poses. The more you mess around with it back here, the more that this back hatch is liable to pop off. So it's just something to keep in mind. But if we do remove that back hatch, you can see more of the mechanics of what I'm talking about with this ball joint, to where if you pull upwards, the head can extend like that. And if you can bring it back down, and it just locks into place. Now that we've thoroughly covered the head, let's look at these shoulders. There's so many different pieces going on here, and I think the best way for you to understand how these work is just to watch me flex it around. The one thing I will say is this doesn't feel like the heaviest material or the thickest material. Everything kind of feels light, especially in this area, sort of hollow in a way. And for the price that this guy goes for, which is about $200, then, you know, you of course expect, I think, a little more weightiness. But at the same time, it's engineered this way to where things move a little more easily. And even though it's not super tight or anything, it's not wobbling around. Everything keeps its pose. But you can see that there's a ball joint working in here. It can, of course, go into that cuff, that rotator cuff right there. That is a part of this butterfly joint. When we say butterfly joint, we mean it can go out, it can go back. It can't do anything too crazy, but it's enough to help him achieve more of a naturalistic look on a lot of different poses. You can also see that he has a double jointed elbow, which is very effective. You can see that you can rotate this around. You can also rotate the lower arm right there. Moving on up, you of course have a ball joint that has a hinge on it for all of the hands. Down here at the diaphragm, you can see that we can lean it back, and it's in combination with this joint down here. So if you want him to lean back, you can a little bit, but it's much more apt for leaning forward, and you can see there's quite a bit of leaning forward you can do with it. It is possible to roll both joints to the side like this, to the other side like this, and you can do quite a decent amount. One element that's sort of surprising is that he can't really turn that easily. Yeah, you can turn it a little up here, and you can't really turn it at all down here. But it's kind of funny because you would almost think a waist swivel would be the easiest articulation point. Aside from the trick neck joint, I would say that the hips are probably the most interesting in terms of the articulation. For one thing, these are drop-down hips. And I've heard some reviewers say that they didn't think they were and they were supposed to be. Well, no, they actually are. They definitely are. I think theirs was probably stuck or something. So you just give it a pull, and it takes a little bit of working. See how I'm having to work it down like that? And because it's a drop-down hip, you get this really large gap to work with. And it's very unsightly, but it really works out well when you want to get higher kicks and things. And so you can get a pretty decent kick because of that. Now, I could probably work it a little bit more if I wanted to get a better kick. But the truth is, I don't really like fooling with it too much because this feels a little complex to handle. I don't necessarily think it's going to break or anything, but because this is all sort of a little hollow and plasticky, I don't want to push it too much. At the same time, I don't want to rub this with a cod piece here, so I've got to be careful. You can also see you can easily swivel like that, and notice how I did have it extended like this, and just a little bit of a push, and you can clear that right up and get the joint cleaned up when you're doing pictures and things like that. Of course, when it comes to a split motion, that drop down hip is going to be instrumental, and it takes quite a bit, but you can get a pretty decent to the side split like that. But I definitely don't think Ultraman is going to be like on a gymnast bar trying to do a split or anything like that. But I think that's plenty for what I need. At the knee, you can see that we do have a double joint, and it does very well. At the very bottom, with his feet, these are really great. Both of these are really tight, so they can hold poses really well even without the display stand. And he does have a toe hinge that's fairly effective, along with a really good ankle rocker and a swivel here at the ball joint. So when you go to pose him, you can really work with those ankles, and you're able to get some pretty wide stances. And even on a diorama piece like I have him standing on right now, he doesn't really have any trouble. If you look down here at his feet, you can see they're very evenly planted. Overall, the articulation is very impressive, and for a figure this size and this price, I would definitely expect it to be, but it does end up living up to the name of Dynaction, because sure enough, these poses are dynamic and there's quite a bit of action you can get out of this guy. So I definitely see him as a very posable figure. One thing that I could spend a really long time on, but I definitely don't want to overextend the review by having it all be dedicated to a giant display stand, it's this cool display stand. You can see that he does include a named base right there, and this is really nice. He also includes, I believe, the Science Patrol logo right there, the organization that kind of helps Ultraman and supports him. And you can see that we have some kind of complex inner workings going on here with locks. So once you put this together, you can just unclip this, and you can extend it this way if you want. And then when you have it where you want, you can clip this in. There's kind of a bunch of lock systems here. And then up here, we have a similar clip. I can unclip it. I can put it down if I want to. I can extend it up if I would like. And then I just clip it back, and then it's in there. There's similar locks going on up here, but they function a little differently. You can see that here, I can actually press this in. And then I can free this up once I have it where I want it. I go to the other side, and I press it in. And now that's locked. And something similar going on up here with these two clips on the posing arm. I can open it up as wide as I want. I can close it however I want. And then I can lock these two back into place by pushing them up. This is a great display stand. And if you want to, all these pieces down here are modular to where you could half the size of this display stand because this thing is gigantic. The display stand itself is actually a full foot long. If you do want to half it to make it a 6-inch display stand, you can totally do that. But if you do the full thing, it takes up a lot of room. And does it hold Ultraman? Yes, it does. You can get all sorts of flying poses with it. And here's just a couple of pictures of me using it. But the truth is that I would never trust a grabber arm like this just directly onto the plastic with the weight of something that's this heavy. I just wouldn't trust that. you're going to come back and you're going to find that there's some marks left in the plastic. I've had too many bad experiences with a company even as premium as Hot Toys with the display stand grabber arms like that, just wrecking the figure. So it's not something that I would put him in extreme poses on. It's the kind of thing that maybe I would have him in a standing pose like this on. I think that would be pretty great, but that might be it. And here I've switched Ultraman's hands out to his grappling hands, and I have to say, this is such an impressive piece. I've had a really good time just posing this guy around. As a matter of fact, I probably posed him around for 45 minutes or so before I could ever actually film this review. He's just that amusing. I did find that I had to be pretty patient as I posed him around, never wanting to push things too far or too fast, just making sure that I took my time and definitely handled the figure the right way. As I always say, if you take care of your figures, they're going to take care of you. You just got to go slow, and you've got to make sure that you're not messing anything up as you are posing it around. Thankfully, I didn't have any major quality concerns. The first one I got of these direct from Amazon, strangely, had been opened and resealed. Not really sure what was going on there, and it was slightly scuffed, so I sent it back for another one. This one was in much better shape and thankfully had not been opened or anything, so I was pretty pleased with it. There are a few little paint imperfections on this guy, just here and there. It's nothing too major, only one or two of them bothers me a little bit, but of course for the price, the hope is always that you're not going to have anything like that and everything's going to be perfect, even though it can never really be. Honestly though, all things considered, I was pleasantly surprised by this guy. He is such a great representation of everything that I have seen from the movie, but everything I've seen from trailers compared to the other figures, I think that this is fantastic. Really what this feels like to me, and I don't have a lot of the other Shin Ultraman figures, but if I was just going by visually what I thought it is, it kind of feels like a cross between the Figuarts version and the Mafex version, only in this supersized scale, which is perfect because there was things that I liked about both of those, but kind of fusing them together in a visual sense creates what I think is probably the definitive visual representation. Now, the scale, it's not for everybody, so I definitely realized right away that that may be a turnoff for some folks, but if you're like me and you don't necessarily have a pre-existing huge collection of other Ultraman stuff in a particular scale, then for me it's much more interesting to have this large, almost film quality display piece, like a maquette of the film design. To me, that's a lot more interesting, and it's certainly a lot more dynamic. Would I suggest the figure? Well, sure, as long as you can get them for right around that $190 or $200 mark. If you're watching this years from now in the future and this guy is going for some kind of crazy amount of money, I'm not sure that I would give any more than what he's going for. I love the light up eyes, I like the alternate hands and the huge display stand, and clearly it's an impressive figure, but I'm not sure if we can ever go too far over the realm of $200 for something like this, because I definitely think that is sort of your max price. Either way, I think he comes off as a really impressive piece, and I certainly hope that you enjoyed watching the review today. Of course, be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss out on any of the other new videos that we have coming all the time here on Fanboys Forever. Of course, we do all sorts of different kinds of videos, a lot of them based on He-Man, Batman, and a lot of other superheroes, but a lot of the times I really do like to show love for the Japanese superheroes, and Ultraman is the king of Japanese superheroes. So I really hope that you enjoyed this departure today as we once again celebrate the release of Shin Ultraman. And as always, God bless you and yours, and I'll see you on Fanboys Forever. Fanboy out.